The rain had a quiet rhythm as it danced over the cobblestone streets of a sleepy Portuguese coastal town. Evening had just begun to settle in, casting everything in a golden blue hue. Down by the marina, nestled between an old bookshop and a fish market that smelled of salt and stories, was a modest little bar named Café du Marche. It wasn't flashy. In fact, most tourists walked right past it. But to locals, it was a place of comfort, a space where time slowed, and everyone knew the bartender's name. On that particular evening, the bar was more alive than usual. A group of bikers, 6 of them, had rolled in just after sundown. Their engines had roared like a storm before settling into the silence of parked chrome. These men were the kind that wore leather not for fashion, but because it had seen things: oil stains, highway dust, memories of long rides and lost bets. They laughed loudly, clinked glasses even louder, and carried the kind of presence that warned strangers to keep to their side of the bar. The door creaked again. In stepped a man, quiet, nearly invisible if you weren't paying attention. He wore a dark hoodie with the hood gently pulled over his head, jeans that had clearly seen many cities, and sneakers muddied with recent rain. His steps weren't hesitant, but careful. Like someone used to walking unnoticed. He took a seat at the far end of the bar, away from the crowd, and waited patiently before softly murmuring, "Un café, pour favor." The bartender, an older gentleman named Rui, looked at him curiously. There was something oddly familiar about the stranger. Not in the way of recognizing a face, but in the way some people carry a certain energy, quiet, but powerful. Before Rui could connect the dots, the bikers had taken notice. One of them, the loudest and broadest, a man named Vasco, leaned in and sneered with amusement. "Look who we've got here. Hoodie man with the baby shoes." His friend, Paulo, chuckled. "He looks like that little guy from the football ads." "What's his name?" "Messi." "Yeah, but shorter." Laughter erupted. Not friendly laughter, the kind that fills a room when someone wants to remind the quiet person that this wasn't their space. The man sipped his coffee slowly. No reaction. No flinch. He just sat there, absorbing the heat of the drink, eyes lowered, calm as a winter lake. They kept going. "I bet if you tapped him, he'd fall over like a cone on a training ground." "Maybe he's here to scout us for Barcelona," another jeered. Still, nothing. At that moment, Rui leaned in closer and narrowed his eyes. The face beneath the hood, yes, it was him. Lionel Messi. The Lionel Messi. The global football legend. The man with more records than some clubs had wins. But here's what stood out: Messi wasn't traveling with guards, cameras, or fans. No entourage, no press. Just him, alone, and intentionally unnoticed. Why? What no one in the bar knew was that Messi had spent the day visiting a local children's hospital just a few miles away. No media. No announcement. He had come quietly, just to spend time with kids battling things far tougher than football matches. And now, he had stopped in for a quiet cup of coffee, hoping to blend in with the background, just another tired traveler seeking warmth. Unfortunately, even greatness can't hide forever. The ridicule from the bikers wasn't personal, they had no clue who he was. But that didn't make it sting any less. Not because of ego, but because it was a reminder of something deeper: even the most successful are never really above judgment when they're stripped of their spotlight. Messi looked up once, briefly, toward a family sitting near the window. A little boy with crutches stared at him, eyes wide. They locked eyes. The boy smiled. Messi nodded back gently, lifting his coffee in an unspoken toast. The bikers kept laughing, loud and careless, not realizing they were mocking a man whose humility was far greater than their pride. Not realizing that sometimes, the quietest person in the room carries the loudest legacy. And as fate would have it, the night wasn't done surprising them. Not even close. The mocking didn't stop, it evolved. As the evening stretched on and the bar grew warmer with alcohol and easy arrogance, the jokes started sharpening like knives hidden in laughter. Vasco, clearly the unofficial leader of the biker pack, leaned back in his chair and threw a smug glance in the quiet man's direction. "Hey, hoodie boy," he called out, just loud enough to grab everyone's attention. "Tell us, how many trophies have you won lately, huh? Bet the only thing you've lifted this year is that tiny cup of coffee." That drew more laughter. One of the younger bikers, a wiry guy with flame tattoos crawling up his neck, added, "I think he's waiting for someone to carry his drink for him. He looks fragile enough to snap in a gust of wind." The group howled. Even the regular patrons who weren't part of the biker group looked uncomfortable. A few glanced over at the hooded man, curious now, sensing there was more to this stranger than met the eye. But the man didn't speak. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look their way. Instead, he took another sip of his coffee and turned slightly, giving the illusion that he was simply uninterested. But his eyes, hidden beneath the low arc of his hoodie, scanned the reflection in the bar mirror. He watched the way they moved, the way they fed off each other's mockery, building their confidence by tearing others down. It wasn't unfamiliar. He'd seen this behavior before. Not in bars, but in stadiums. In press rooms. Online. On the lips of doubters before every match that mattered. The bartender, Roy, was growing visibly uneasy. He had served drinks to tourists, fishermen, even celebrities before, but never had someone like him, someone so quiet, so famous, and yet so incredibly human, sat in his bar, enduring this sort of thing in silence. He leaned in and whispered cautiously, "You all right, Senor Messi?" The man raised his eyes and offered a gentle smile. "Este bem, Roy. Let them talk." The confirmation sent a quiet shiver through the bartender's spine. Roy couldn't believe it, the real Lionel Messi was sitting at the edge of his bar, completely alone, allowing himself to be mocked by men who didn't have the faintest idea of who they were taunting. But what was even more remarkable was how calm Messi remained. He didn't carry the bitterness of fame, or the entitlement of legacy. No one would have blamed him if he'd stood up, taken off his hood, and shut the bikers down with a single look. But he didn't. Because for Messi, fame had never been a weapon, it was a weight. And tonight, he chose not to lift it. Yet the bikers were only growing bolder. Vasco stood now, pushing his chair back dramatically, arms wide open like he was performing on stage. "I mean, come on," he said loudly. "He hasn't said a word all night. Maybe he doesn't speak Portuguese. Or maybe he's just used to hiding behind referees and teammates. You know, like Messi does." More laughter, this time even louder. They were having a field day, drunk on their own echoes. But not everyone was laughing. The family by the window had gone quiet. The boy with crutches, still watching Messi with wide, admiring eyes, looked hurt on his behalf. His mother whispered something to him, maybe trying to explain that not all people understood who they were really talking about. Messi glanced at the boy and offered the smallest smile, just a twitch of the lips and a slow blink, a silent thank you for understanding without words. And then, something changed. The sound of an engine outside, loud and unmistakable, rumbled through the wooden floorboards. Not a rough, snarling Harley like the bikers, but a smoother, deeper purr, luxurious, controlled. Heads turned toward the window. Moments later, the bar door opened once again. A man stepped inside, taller, sharper in posture, with confidence in every movement. He wore a black bomber jacket over a fitted tee, designer sneakers still damp from the drizzle, and dark sunglasses despite the late hour. He didn't just enter the room, he owned it. The bikers fell silent, almost instinctively. The room shifted, tension and awe creeping in like fog. The man removed his sunglasses slowly, scanning the bar with a half-smile, until his eyes locked onto the hooded figure at the counter. "Leo," he said. "You really know how to pick your hideouts." And with that, Cristiano Ronaldo walked across the room, straight toward Messi, unknowingly stepping right into the middle of a night neither of them would forget. A hush fell over the bar that was so complete it felt unnatural, like the building itself had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. The air held still, thick with disbelief and sudden awareness. Cristiano Ronaldo, one of the most recognizable faces on the planet, the man who commanded stadiums and silenced nations with a single strike, had just walked into Café du March. Not with a team, not with bodyguards or press, but casually, confidently, as if this tiny harborside bar had been waiting for him all along. His entrance didn't need words to make an impact. His presence alone was a shockwave. And yet, he wasn't there to be the center of attention. His focus was fixed on one person, the man sitting quietly at the end of the bar, still hooded, still sipping his now lukewarm coffee with the serenity of a monk. "Leo," Ronaldo repeated, his voice rich and amused. "You always had a thing for low-key places. What is it with you and hiding from the world?" At that, Messi finally looked up, the corners of his lips curving into a soft smile. There was a warmth in his eyes, not of surprise, but of recognition. Of familiarity. Two men, once framed as opposites, knew each other in ways most people couldn't begin to understand. They had seen each other at their most brilliant and their most broken, not just as rivals, but as reflections. Messi stood, extending a hand that Ronaldo took in an easy handshake, pulling him into a quick, friendly hug. No dramatic fanfare. Just two legends reconnecting. The bar, however, was stunned. Mouths hung open. Phones trembled in hesitant hands, unsure whether to capture the moment or let it live untouched. Vasco, the loudest of the bikers, blinked hard. His grin had disappeared. His laughter from moments ago now seemed like a distant memory echoing in the wrong room. The rest of the bikers shifted in their seats, their earlier bravado slowly cracking like old leather under pressure. Cristiano turned, finally giving them his attention. "You boys mocking my friend here?" he asked, not harshly, but directly, like a coach calling out a player mid-practice. Vasco, trying to hold on to some shred of pride, stood and shrugged. "Just teasing, you know. We didn't know it was him. Besides, football's just a game. No harm meant." Cristiano raised an eyebrow, the kind of look that had silenced press rooms and unsettled defenders for years. He walked toward them with a deliberate calmness, like a lion in no hurry to prove he's king. "You didn't know who he was, and yet you mocked him. That says more about you than it does about him," Ronaldo said, folding his arms. "But here's something you might want to consider," he added, nodding toward Messi. "That man right there. He's been doubted, mocked, underestimated his whole life. People said he was too small, too quiet, too fragile. And every time they did, he answered not with words, but with brilliance. You call football a game, and yes, it is, but games reveal character. And Leo's character is something you wouldn't understand unless you've had to carry the hopes of millions on shoulders built for silence, not spectacle." The bikers didn't know how to respond. They weren't being yelled at. They weren't being threatened. And yet, they felt smaller than they had all night. One of them, Miguel, younger, less hardened, cleared his throat and said hesitantly, "We didn't mean to disrespect him. We just didn't recognize him. Honestly, we thought he was just some quiet tourist." Messi, who had been watching quietly, finally stepped forward. "I am a quiet tourist," he said simply. "And that's okay." There was no anger in his voice. No wounded pride. Just calm acceptance. His humility was disarming. It made the room feel heavier, as if everyone suddenly realized they'd missed something important while chasing the thrill of mockery. Cristiano turned back to Messi, shaking his head with a soft chuckle. "You never change, do you?" Messi smiled, "I try not to." Ronaldo turned to the room now, addressing not just the bikers but everyone, the family near the window, the bartender, the couple huddled near the fireplace. "Let me ask you something," he said, walking to the center of the bar like a speaker about to deliver something far bigger than a speech. "What does greatness look like to you? Is it loud? Flashy? Always proving itself? Because I've been called the best, many times. I've been called arrogant, selfish, even a machine. But do you know who I always watched, even when we were rivals? Him. He pointed to Messi. Because greatness isn't just about scoring goals. It's about showing up every day, giving your all, and never needing to be the loudest person in the room to be the strongest. The bar went silent again. But this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was reverent. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist, like the sky itself had paused to listen. And in that stillness, something shifted in the room. A respect, previously absent, began to settle over the space like a warm, invisible blanket. The same men who had mocked Messi minutes ago now looked at him with a mixture of awe and apology. And it was only the beginning of a night that would be remembered long after the final cup of coffee had gone cold. The energy in the room had changed completely. What had begun as a night filled with rough laughter and careless jokes was now transformed into something else entirely, something quieter, heavier, and strangely humbling. The man who had been the target of that mockery now stood calmly at the center of the very same room, and beside him stood another titan of the sport, his longtime rival and unexpected ally, Cristiano Ronaldo. The bikers, once so sure of themselves, were no longer jeering. They had sunk slightly into their chairs, unsure whether to apologize, retreat, or pretend nothing had happened. Vasco, the loudest and most vocal of them all, crossed his arms tightly and leaned back like someone trying to hide the fact that they were suddenly sweating. The sound of the rain tapping against the windows grew louder in the new silence. Cristiano wasn't finished speaking. He looked around slowly, making eye contact with each person at the bar. His voice didn't rise, but it carried weight, not the kind that comes from volume, but the kind that comes from truth. You know, he began, we've been compared for most of our lives. Me and him. On magazine covers, on television, on every football pitch we've ever played. They say he's quiet and I'm loud. That he's humble and I'm proud. That he stays in the background while I walk through fire. But none of that has ever really mattered to us. He turned to Messi. We never needed to fight each other. The world just liked the story better that way. Messi smiled faintly but said nothing. His silence wasn't shyness, it was power. The kind of strength that only someone who had spent decades being misjudged could carry with such grace. Cristiano stepped a bit closer to the bikers, but not in a threatening way. He placed both hands on the bar and leaned in slightly, voice now almost conversational. What you call a game, he said, referring to Vasco's earlier comment, is something we've poured our lives into. Every day, every hour, for decades. Not just for trophies or headlines. But for the people. For moments, for that one little boy sitting at the window right now, staring at Leo like he's seeing magic. Everyone glanced toward the window, where the boy with the crutches sat frozen, wide-eyed, still clutching a juice glass with both hands like it was made of gold. Cristiano continued. You want to know what real strength looks like? It's not in how many drinks you can handle or how loud your laugh is. It's in showing up even when the world doubts you. It's in giving back when you've already given everything. It's in kindness when no one's watching. And Leo, he glanced at Messi, he does all of that, every single day. Vasco looked uneasy, but to his credit, he didn't snap back. There was something in Cristiano's tone, not angry, but deeply sincere, that made it hard to argue. The bar had turned from a battleground into a classroom, and the lesson was being taught by two men who had nothing left to prove. Still, Messi finally broke his silence. You don't have to like football, he said gently. You don't have to admire me. I'm just a man. But maybe think twice before laughing at someone just because they don't talk like you, or look like you, or act like you expect. You never know what kind of life they've lived. Or who they've helped. Or how hard they've fought just to stand in the same space as you. His words weren't loud, but they lingered in the air like incense. And something about the way he said it, not angry, not scolding, just honest, made it hit even harder. The youngest biker, Miguel, shifted in his seat, clearly affected. He glanced at Messi, then Ronaldo, then backed down at his beer. "I didn't know," he muttered. "I didn't know he was here doing charity. I thought he was just, some guy with his hood up." Messi nodded, not with smugness but with understanding. "That's okay," he said. "You know now." It was Vasco who took the longest to speak. He tapped his fingers on the counter, cracked his knuckles, and then stood up. For a moment, everyone braced themselves for a comeback. But instead, he took a slow breath and said, "I was wrong. That's all. I was just being stupid." It wasn't a dramatic apology. It wasn't polished or poetic. But it was real. Messi reached out and shook his hand, firmly, without hesitation. "You're not stupid," Messi said. "You're human. That's enough." Cristiano, who had been watching quietly now, smiled and nodded. "And now you've had the rare honor of learning humility from the greatest player of all time." Laughter rippled through the room, not mocking this time, but light-hearted. Warm. Even the bikers chuckled. Tension lifted like fog rolling off the sea. The bartender, Rui, stepped out from behind the counter, wiping his hands on a cloth that now seemed far too dirty for the occasion. He looked at the two footballers, then the bikers, then the boy by the window. He raised a glass and said, "Well, this has turned out to be the most important night Café du Mar has ever seen." No one disagreed. And as Messi sat back down, now surrounded not by mockery but by admiration, Cristiano leaned on the counter beside him, whispering with a grin, "Still think you're better at disappearing than I am?" Messi chuckled. "You're the loud one, remember?" Cristiano laughed. "Maybe. But tonight? You were the loudest man in the room, and you didn't even say a word." And with that, the night continued, not with mocking laughter, but with real conversation, real connection, and the rare kind of peace that comes when people truly see each other for the first time. Outside, the drizzle had eased into a gentle mist that clung to the windows, turning the glow from inside the bar into a warm, golden blur. Café du Mar was no longer just a bar that night, it had become something else entirely. It was a story in motion, a quiet storm of transformation, and no one was quite sure how they had ended up in the middle of it. The laughter was softer now, the conversations humbler, as if every word spoken had to carry some weight, some purpose. The tension had vanished, replaced with a kind of reverence that only came when people witnessed something rare, humility wrapped in greatness. Messi had returned to his seat, still cradling his half-finished coffee like it was a ritual rather than a drink. His posture remained relaxed, but those who had doubted him earlier now saw it differently, not as timidity, but as control. The kind that doesn't need a spotlight. He wasn't glowing with pride. If anything, he looked like someone who had already moved on from what had just happened. For Messi, moments like this weren't about winning, they were reminders of what mattered beyond the pitch. Meanwhile, Cristiano Ronaldo had taken up a spot near the jukebox, flipping through old records with one hand while chatting with Rui, the bartender, like they were longtime friends. Even he, with all his signature confidence and charisma, seemed a little quieter than usual, like the presence of his old rival-turned-companion brought out a different side of him. Not the performer, but the person. Vasco and the other bikers hadn't left. They were still there, still large, still rugged, but now more reserved. The kind of quiet that follows an ego getting punched in the gut by truth. Not because someone insulted them, but because someone taught them without needing to. They whispered to each other in low tones, occasionally glancing at Messi with expressions that had shed their earlier smugness. The mocking was gone, replaced by something resembling respect. The kind of respect that's earned, not demanded. The youngest of them, Miguel, couldn't hold back his curiosity any longer. He walked slowly toward Ronaldo, holding something small in his hand, a keychain shaped like a football, worn at the edges. He held it out awkwardly. Would you sign this?" he asked, voice cracking just a bit. Cristiano looked at the keychain, then at the boyish eagerness in Miguel's eyes. With a smile, he nodded and took it gently. "Of course," he said, pulling a pen from Roy's counter. As he scribbled his signature, he glanced at Messi across the bar. "You know," he said casually to Miguel, "I've signed thousands of things over the years. But tonight's different." Miguel looked confused. "Why?" Cristiano handed the keychain back and said, "Because tonight wasn't about football. It was about learning what kind of man you want to be." Miguel stared at the signature for a moment and nodded slowly. "Thanks," he said quietly. Then something completely unexpected happened. Cristiano turned to Vasco, the former king of sarcasm, and smirked. "You play football, Vasco?" The big man scoffed at first. "I mean, I did. Back in school. Before the bike and the beer gut." Cristiano grinned. "Perfect. Come on then." Vasco blinked. "What?" "Outside. You and me. One shot each. Bin for a goal. You miss, you buy dessert for the entire bar. I miss, I buy you all around." Laughter erupted again, this time, real and joyful. People started moving toward the door. Roy followed them, shaking his head and laughing. "If you break my window, Cristiano, I'm sending the bill to Juventus." In the alleyway behind the bar, with the salty wind from the sea brushing against their backs, Ronaldo and Vasco faced off. A dented trash bin was set up as a makeshift goal. Phones were already out, filming. No bright stadium lights, no cameras flashing, just damp pavement, a few puddles, and a crowd holding their breath for no reason other than the sheer absurdity of the moment. Vasco took the first shot. It veered left, hit the side of the bin, and bounced off into a puddle. Groans and laughter echoed. Vasco shrugged and held his hands up. "Told you I was out of practice." Cristiano winked, took 2 steps back, and without breaking stride, sent the ball sailing straight into the center of the bin. The kind of effortless precision that only decades of obsession could produce. The bar exploded in cheers. But what happened next surprised everyone even more. Ronaldo walked over to his car, popped the trunk, and pulled out a box. He carried it back to Vasco and handed it over without fanfare. Inside was a brand new pair of football boots, black, sleek, expensive. Signed. "Here," he said. "Not as a punishment for missing. As a reminder. Start something in this town. Youth team, weekly game, whatever. Don't let your past be your excuse. Let it be your reason." Vasco looked stunned. The man who had mocked greatness was now being trusted with the seeds of it. He looked up at Ronaldo, then across at Messi, who had stepped outside with the boy on crutches. The boy's face lit up as Messi handed him a signed jersey, kneeling to talk to him eye to eye. Not as a star, but as someone who understood pain, dreams, and the power of hope. The moment didn't feel scripted. It didn't feel like a publicity stunt. It felt right. As though all of this, every awkward joke, every insult, every word left unspoken, had led here. To something meaningful. And just like that, a night that had started with mockery turned into a night of legacy. Not because 2 legends were in the same room, but because they reminded everyone watching what legacy really means, the impact you leave behind, long after the cheers have faded. Inside Café du Mar, the atmosphere had turned almost surreal. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from awkwardness, but rather the kind that follows something sacred, something memorable. The bar's walls, once echoing with sarcastic jeers and careless laughter, now held the weight of a lesson well learned. It was as if everyone there had lived through a scene they'd one day retell over drinks, describing how 2 of football's most iconic figures had walked into a humble seaside bar and turned an ordinary night into a chapter of something timeless. Messi had quietly returned to his seat inside after the alleyway spectacle had ended. He didn't linger in crowds or bask in the attention the way people might have expected. Instead, he took a quiet corner near the old wood-burning stove and reached for his backpack, worn, modest, almost comically plain for a man of his stature. He unzipped it and pulled out a thin folder, the kind used by schoolteachers or nurses, and inside were a few carefully folded shirts. They weren't new. In fact, they looked washed, pressed, and carefully preserved. Each one bore his signature, but not the commercial type. These were hand-signed, personalized, and clearly not meant for sale or display. These were meant to be given away to those who truly needed something more than a jersey. They were gifts, not souvenirs. He called Roy over, the bartender who had been silently watching everything like a lighthouse keeper during a storm. "These," Messi said softly, "are for your kids. You said your son just started playing football, right?" Roy's face faltered for a moment. His eyes blinked a few times like he was trying to push back something heavy. "Yes," he said. "My youngest, Tiago. He just made the school team. But we couldn't afford the proper gear." Messi handed him one of the shirts. It was a youth-sized version of his Argentina jersey, name and number printed boldly on the back. "Tell him to keep playing," he said. "Not for trophies. Just for love." Roy took the shirt like it was made of glass, holding it against his chest with a hand trembling more from emotion than age. "I don't know how to thank you," he murmured. "You already did," Messi replied. "When you made me coffee like I was just another guy." At another table, the woman who had come in earlier with her 3 children sat wiping her eyes with a napkin. She had recognized Messi when he entered, but hadn't dared approach. Her youngest daughter had a developmental condition, and their lives had been a long series of quiet battles. Messi had noticed her earlier, noticed the tired smile, the weathered hands, the way her children clung to her. He walked over now, holding a plain white envelope. "I overheard," he said gently, crouching so he was level with her. "You mentioned you've been struggling with school fees." She looked at him, speechless, and nodded slowly. Messi pressed the envelope into her hand. "This isn't charity. It's encouragement. Just promise me you'll keep going. Even when it gets hard." She tried to speak, but the tears came faster than her words. All she could manage was a whispered, "Thank you." He nodded once, respectfully, then looked at the children, tousling the youngest boy's hair with a smile. "And you," he said, "be good to your mother. She's the strongest person in this room." Across the room, Cristiano had taken a seat near the jukebox again. He'd just finished buying another round for the bar, honoring his light-hearted bet with Vasco. But even he wasn't holding court like usual. He was watching Messi now, not with envy, not with competition, but with something closer to admiration. The kind of admiration that only those who truly understand sacrifice and solitude can offer each other. Cristiano raised a glass, looking toward Messi. "You could have shut them down with a single sentence," he said aloud. "But you taught them something instead." Messi gave a quiet smile in return. "A trophy gets you applause," he said. "But kindness gets you change." The bar nodded collectively. No one argued. Vasco, still holding the new pair of football boots gifted by Cristiano, stepped forward. He looked awkward, still uncomfortable in the new skin of humility, but determined. "I don't know if I deserve these," he said, raising the boots. "But I'll start something. A weekend league maybe. For the kids in the neighborhood. Lot of them don't even have balls to kick." Cristiano clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Then you've already won more than most players ever will." There was no champagne. No music blaring. Just the sound of gentle rain on glass, the soft murmur of conversations, and a few candles flickering like they were proud to witness the evening unfold. It felt, to everyone there, like the kind of night that changes people, not because of fame, but because of the unexpected humanity hiding inside it. The little boy with crutches, still near the window, was now wearing Messi's jersey like armor. He didn't care about the value or the name, it was the gesture that turned his gaze to the stars. He stood up shakily, supported by his mother, and walked slowly over to Messi. "Thank you," he whispered. Messi looked down, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, and said quietly, "One day, people will come to see you. And they'll say, he's the one who never gave up. And with that, the boy returned to his seat, eyes shining. The bars sat together, but somehow everyone had grown closer. Divides of class, ego, and ignorance had melted into something softer. They were no longer bikers, bartenders, waitresses, or global icons. They were just people, flawed, learning, and connected by a night that had started with cruelty and ended in compassion. No headlines would cover it. No cameras had captured the best parts. But everyone in that room would remember it forever. Because greatness, it turns out, isn't just measured in goals. Sometimes, it's measured in quiet moments when no one is keeping score. The night had grown deep, and the world outside Café du Mar had gone still. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving the cobblestone street glistening under the amber glow of street lamps. A few fishermen shuffled past the windows on their way home, unaware that just feet away from them, legends sat like ordinary men, surrounded by strangers who had been forever changed. Inside the bar, the last of the glasses were being wiped dry. The jukebox played a soft, jazzy Portuguese tune in the background, nothing grand, nothing flashy, but perfect in its simplicity. Conversations had quieted to murmurs, and laughter had softened to smiles shared across tables. The bar, once brimming with noise and tension, now felt like a sacred space. There was warmth not just in the air but in the air between people, a comfort that came from knowing you had witnessed something meaningful. At the far end of the room, Messi and Ronaldo sat side by side for the first time in a long while, not as rivals, not even as teammates, but as men who had lived lives that only the other could understand. Between them was a shared silence, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. It was the silence of mutual respect, of battles fought and wounds healed not just in matches, but in the eyes of millions watching them every time they stepped on a pitch. Cristiano leaned back slightly, looking around the room, and then glanced at Messi with a lopsided grin. "You know," he said, "this might be the strangest match we've ever played." Messi smirked. "And the most important one." The bartender, Rui, emerged from the kitchen with 2 steaming mugs of herbal tea, placing them in front of the 2 players like he was offering tribute to kings. "On the house," he said. "Not for who you are out there," he motioned toward the door, "but for who you were in here." Cristiano nodded. "Obrigado." Messi raised his mug in a quiet toast. Cristiano mirrored him. 2 of the greatest athletes to ever live, now sharing tea in a quiet Portuguese bar, the stadium lights replaced by dim bulbs and flickering candles. The bikers had slowly spread out through the bar, but now they sat with others, chatting with locals, joking with the family by the window, even asking Messi about football tips like kids at a summer camp. Miguel, the youngest biker, was already sketching ideas on a napkin for a youth football club. He wanted to call it Leos de Praia, the Beach Lions. He said it felt right. Vasco, the once mocking leader, was now deep in discussion with Cristiano, asking questions he had never thought to ask before. Not about fame or fortune, but about failure. "How do you keep going," he asked, "when you lose something big, like a final?" Cristiano's answer was honest. "You feel it. You sit with it. You don't pretend it doesn't hurt. But the next morning, you train. You get back up, because that's what makes you a player. Not the goals. Not the trophies. The getting back up." That simple truth settled over Vasco like a warm blanket. Nearby, the little boy with crutches had fallen asleep in his mother's arms, still wearing Messi's oversized jersey, the name stretching across his back like a superhero's cape. His breathing was soft, steady, and the peaceful look on his face said everything words couldn't. In his dreams, he wasn't the kid in crutches anymore. He was sprinting down the field, wind in his hair, stadium lights in his eyes. Messi noticed and stood up. He walked over slowly, careful not to wake the boy, and handed the mother another envelope, smaller this time, but no less meaningful. "Just in case he needs help with therapy or equipment," he whispered. "Don't wait for it to get easier. Just let him keep trying." She clutched it with both hands and whispered, "You've changed his life." Messi gently shook his head. "No. He'll do that on his own. I'm just part of the beginning." When he returned to his seat, Cristiano looked at him and said, almost in disbelief, "You never stop, do you?" Messi shrugged, a little shyly. "It doesn't cost much to be kind." Cristiano chuckled. "You and I really are different." Messi looked at him, serious now. "Not as different as people think." Cristiano raised his mug again. "To quiet strength." Messi tapped his against it. "And to loud hearts." The clock above the bar ticked toward midnight. A few patrons began to leave, offering handshakes, thanks, and even shy hugs before slipping out into the cool night. Roy locked the door behind them but left the lights dim and the music playing, not ready to let the moment end just yet. Messi stood up and picked up his backpack. Cristiano followed suit, stretching and cracking his neck. They were heading back out into the world that knew them only by headlines and highlight reels. But for the people in Café du Mar, they would be remembered differently, as the men who stepped off the pedestal and into their lives, even if just for a night. As they walked toward the door, Roy stopped them one last time. "I hope you know what you did here tonight," he said. Cristiano clapped him on the shoulder. "We just had tea and played a bit of football." Roy smiled. "No. You reminded us that greatness doesn't arrive with a roar. Sometimes, it walks in quietly, sits down at the bar, and listens before it speaks." Messi turned back one last time and said, "People forget goals. But they remember how you made them feel." And with that, the door opened, and the two legends disappeared into the misty streets, the sound of their footsteps fading into the calm of the sleeping town. No cameras. No flashing lights. Just the legacy of kindness, echoing quietly in the hearts they'd touched. And in the corner of the bar, the jukebox continued to play, as if telling everyone left behind that the story wasn't over, it had only just begun.